72 hours ago, an object known as Comet C 2023-A3, or Tsuchinshan-ATLAS, did something unexpected. It brightened, suddenly and violently, by a factor of 100. From a faint smudge in powerful telescopes, it erupted into a point of light visible to the naked eye, outshining all predictions. 48 hours ago, NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory issued a statement. They called the event normal outgassing, a sudden sublimation of volatile ices triggered by the sun's warmth. It was a neat, tidy explanation for a spectacular, but ultimately natural, celestial firework. And then, 24 hours ago, a network of amateur radio telescopes run by enthusiasts in basements and backyards across Europe detected structured, repeating pulses at a frequency of 1.6 gigahertz, originating from the exact position of the comet. Since that finding was posted to a small astrophysics forum, there has been complete and total institutional silence. The official story no longer aligns with the observational data. The narrative from our most trusted scientific bodies has frozen in time, refusing to acknowledge the two most significant details of this event. The first is a trajectory deviation, a tiny but impossible course correction of 3.5 microradians that was measured by the European Southern Observatory's Very Large Telescope. The second is the signal itself, a clear, repeating, and mathematically structured broadcast that has no known natural origin. This is not the profile of a simple cometary outburst. This is something else entirely. Tonight, we begin an investigation into those 72 hours. We will not speculate wildly, but instead, we will do what the official channels have refused to do. We will look at all the evidence. We will connect the timeline of the brightening, the trajectory shift, and the radio signal. We will deconstruct the official explanation and hold it up against the hard data. By the end of our journey, the silence from those who are meant to inform us may begin to sound less like caution and more like a confession. The story begins not with the flash of light, but with the quiet numbers that came before it. For months, Tsuchinshan-ATLAS had been behaving precisely as expected. Its orbit was plotted, its composition analyzed through spectroscopy, and its brightness curve predicted with remarkable accuracy. It was a long-period comet, a pristine relic from the Oort cloud, the solar system's vast icy shell. It was interesting to astronomers, but not extraordinary. The models predicted a gradual increase in brightness as it approached its perihelion, its closest point to the sun. But the models were wrong. The brightening event wasn't gradual. It was nearly instantaneous. In the space of less than 6 hours, its apparent magnitude jumped from a feeble +7 to a brilliant +2. To put this in perspective, this is the energy equivalent of detonating over 30 billion tons of TNT on its surface. The official explanation that pockets of frozen carbon monoxide or nitrogen deep within the comet's nucleus suddenly vaporized and burst forth is the standard theory for such events. It's a plausible, textbook answer. But it's an answer that only works if you ignore the other data. It's an answer that requires you to believe in a coincidence of impossible scale. The first piece of ignored data is the course correction. 3.5 microradians. The number is infinitesimally small, almost absurdly so. A microradian is 1/1,000,000th of a radian, a unit used to measure angles. To visualize this, imagine standing in New York City and aiming a laser pointer at a specific window on a skyscraper in Los Angeles. A deviation of 3.5 microradians would be like shifting that laser dot by less than the width of a human hand. It is a minuscule change, but on the scale of the cosmos, it is profoundly significant. To achieve such a change in trajectory, a comet must eject mass. This is the principle of a rocket engine. The normal outgassing theory suggests this is what happened. A powerful jet of gas and dust erupted from one side of the comet, pushing it slightly off course. Here is the problem. An eruption of that magnitude, powerful enough to alter the path of an object several kilometers in diameter, would have been blindingly obvious. It would have created a massive, expanding cloud of dust and gas, a temporary coma that would have dwarfed the comet's nucleus. Instruments like the Hubble Space Telescope and the James Webb Space Telescope would have seen it clearly. Yet, the observational data shows the opposite. The coma of Tsuchinshan-ATLAS remained unusually compact and well-defined throughout the brightening event. There was no visible evidence of the titanic propulsive force required to make such a maneuver. The energy appeared, the trajectory changed, but the cause, the physical jet of material, is nowhere to be found. It's a violation of Newton's third law on a cosmic scale, a reaction without an observable action. This brings us to the second, and perhaps more troubling, piece of data that the official narrative omits. 24 hours after the peak brightening, as astronomers were still trying to reconcile the energy output with the lack of a dust cloud, the amateur radio community began picking up the signal. It wasn't a faint whisper buried in static. It was a clear, strong series of pulses on a narrow band centered at 1.665 gigahertz. This frequency is not random. It lies in a protected portion of the radio spectrum, a quiet channel reserved for radio astronomy, specifically for studying the spectral line of the hydroxyl radical. It is a cosmic water hole, a place where the universe is naturally quiet, making it an ideal spot to listen for faint signals, or to send one. The signal was not a random burst of cosmic noise. It had a distinct, repeating structure, 5 pulses of varying lengths, followed by a period of complete silence lasting exactly 8.3 minutes. Then, the 5 pulses would repeat, identical to the last set. This pattern has now been observed for over a dozen cycles before all transmissions abruptly ceased. No known natural phenomenon can account for this. Pulsars, the rapidly spinning neutron stars that are the galaxy's great lighthouses, have a metronomic regularity, but their pulses are broad spectrum, not confined to such a razor-thin frequency band. Solar flares or magnetar bursts are chaotic, one-off events, not structured, repeating messages. The Doppler shift of the signal, the slight change in its frequency caused by its movement, was a perfect match for the calculated velocity and trajectory of Comet Tsuchinshan-ATLAS. There is no doubt about the signal's origin. It came from the comet. So we are left with a cascade of anomalies, each one difficult to explain, but together they form a pattern that defies coincidence. A sudden, 100-fold increase in brightness with no corresponding dust cloud. A precise, non-ballistic change in trajectory with no visible means of propulsion. And a structured, artificial-seeming radio signal broadcast on a protected frequency. The official story of normal outgassing explains, at best, a fraction of the first anomaly while completely ignoring the other two. It asks us to believe that a natural, chaotic explosion of ice just happened to produce a perfectly efficient, ghost-like thrust, and that simultaneously, an entirely separate and unknown natural phenomenon began broadcasting a structured signal from the exact same location. This is not just unlikely, it stretches the definition of statistical impossibility. The silence from major astronomical institutions is therefore not just a lack of information, it is a choice. It is a decision to not discuss the trajectory data. It is a decision to not acknowledge the radio signals confirmed by dozens of independent observers. When the data doesn't fit the story, there are two options: change the story or discard the data. For the last 24 hours, the world's leading space agencies have chosen to discard the data. The question we must now ask is not just what happened to Comet Tsuchinshan-ATLAS. The real question is why. Why is a simple, complete explanation being withheld? Why are the most profound observations of this event being systematically ignored? This is not just another comet. The data suggests it is something far more significant, a moment that could redefine our understanding of the universe. And as it continues its journey through our solar system, we will continue our investigation into the truth that is being hidden in plain sight. The silence itself is the beginning of the story. To understand the depth of the current institutional silence, we must first build a foundation of fact. We must reconstruct the official timeline of events using only the data and statements that have been publicly released. This sequence is critical because it reveals not only what was said, but more importantly, what was left unsaid and when. Our investigation begins on October 12th, 2025, at precisely 0430 Coordinated Universal Time. At that moment, an automated system at the Palomar Observatory in California flagged an anomaly. The system is called the Zwicky Transient Facility, or ZTF. It is a robotic eye on the night sky, designed to detect celestial objects that change in brightness or position. Its camera, attached to the Samuel Oschin telescope, scans the entire northern sky every 2 nights, generating a torrent of data processed by supercomputers looking for anything new or different. On that morning, the ZTF software noticed that Comet Tsuchinshan-ATLAS had suddenly brightened by 2.5 astronomical magnitudes. For those unfamiliar with the scale, it's a counterintuitive system where smaller numbers mean brighter objects. A jump of 2.5 magnitudes is not a subtle flicker. It represents a 10-fold increase in luminosity. The alert was automatically disseminated to a network of astronomers worldwide, a routine notification about a comet undergoing a standard outburst. At this point, everything was proceeding by the book. For the next 30 hours, observatories across the globe, both professional and amateur, turned their attention to the comet. The data poured in, and the story it told became increasingly strange. The brightening didn't stop. It continued to escalate at a logarithmic rate. The initial 10-fold increase was just the beginning. The climax occurred on October 13th at approximately 11 UTC. At its peak, the comet had brightened by a full 5 magnitudes from its baseline. This translates to an object shining with 100 times its predicted intensity. It had crossed the threshold of naked eye visibility, appearing as a new, temporary star in the pre-dawn sky for observers in the southern hemisphere. This is a rare and spectacular event. Comets are known for outbursts, but one of this magnitude is exceptional. it generated a wave of excitement in the astronomical community. The key observation, repeated by multiple independent sources, was the nature of this brightness. It was intensely concentrated. Unlike other comets in major outbursts, like the famous Comet Holmes in 2007, which expanded into a ghostly sphere of dust larger than the Sun, Tsuchinshan-ATLAS remained almost star-like. The energy was immense, but it wasn't creating a vast, diffuse cloud. It was a sharp, brilliant point of light. With the world's astronomical community buzzing, an official explanation was inevitable. It came later that same day. On October 13th, at 1745 UTC, 6 hours and 45 minutes after the observed peak, NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California, released a public statement. JPL is the world's premier center for robotic space exploration and the de facto authority on solar system dynamics. When they speak, the world listens. Their statement was brief, technical, and reassuring. It attributed the entire event to a sudden sublimation of volatile ices. The release explained that as the comet neared the Sun, pockets of supercooled gases like carbon monoxide trapped beneath the surface crust likely reached a critical temperature. They flash vaporized in a chain reaction, violently rupturing the surface and releasing a cloud of gas and dust. This freshly exposed, highly reflective icy material, lit by the sun, caused a dramatic surge in brightness. The explanation was elegant, simple, and based on well-established models of cometary physics. It neatly packaged the spectacular light show into a known natural phenomenon. And for millions of people who read the news reports that followed, that is where the story ended. A comet did something spectacular, and science explained it. But in the meticulous world of celestial mechanics, an explanation must account for all the data, not just the most obvious parts. The JPL statement is a masterpiece of omission. It addresses the brightness, the primary observable, but it is completely silent on the comet's motion. There is no mention of velocity, no mention of trajectory. At the time the statement was released, multiple observatories had already logged enough astrometric data, precise measurements of the comet's position against background stars, to calculate its path with extreme precision. This data, which would have been available to JPL, already showed the 3.5 microradian deviation. It was a small but undeniable change, a clear indication of a non-gravitational force acting upon the comet. For the official statement to make no mention of this, to focus solely on the visual spectacle while ignoring the dynamic implications, is a conspicuous choice. It suggests a deliberate decision to present the simplest possible narrative, even if it meant setting aside data that didn't fit. The timing is also crucial. The JPL statement was released approximately 6 hours before the first amateur radio astronomers in Europe would begin detecting the structured pulses at 1.6 gigahertz. The official story was therefore cemented in the public consciousness before the most anomalous piece of evidence had even been discovered. It created a narrative baseline, a lens of normalcy, through which all subsequent, more bizarre data would be viewed and, as it turns out, dismissed. This is how a mystery is controlled. By establishing an incomplete but plausible explanation early, you frame anyone who brings up contradictory evidence later as a purveyor of fantasy. The official timeline, therefore, consists of 3 key events. First, the initial tenfold brightening detected by the ZTF. Second, the peak hundredfold brightness visible to the naked eye. And third, the official JPL explanation of outgassing, which conveniently accounts for the light but ignores the motion. This timeline is the bedrock of the official story. It is clean, logical, and self-contained. It presents a universe that is spectacular but ultimately understandable, a cosmos that operates on principles we have already mastered. But it is a story with holes. The trajectory data was ignored. The compact nature of the coma was not fully addressed, and it created a convenient curtain of established fact behind which the truly inexplicable evidence, the radio signal, would soon appear. By presenting this sanitized version of events, the authorities created a powerful illusion of control. But as we will see, the universe rarely conforms to the narratives we build for it. The data that was left on the cutting room floor of that press release is where the real story begins. The story of not one, but two impossible events happening at the same time. The timeline is not just a sequence of events, it's an artifact. It's a curated piece of evidence in itself, showing a clear intent to manage the public perception of an event that, behind the scenes, was likely causing profound confusion and concern. Before the radio signals, before the trajectory analysis became a public whisper, the decision was made to close the book on Tsuchinshan-ATLAS. But someone forgot to tell the comet. The official narrative, carefully constructed around the singular event of Comet Tsuchinshan-ATLAS, begins to fracture when we widen the lens. While the world's telescopes were focused on the spectacular brightening of one object, another, far more enigmatic visitor to our solar system was also deviating from its predicted path. This second anomaly, happening in the same 48-hour window, transforms the incident from a statistical curiosity into a profound mathematical improbability. The object in question is designated 3I Atlas. The I in its name stands for interstellar, meaning it, like the famous Oumuamua before it, is not from our solar system. It is a traveler from the void between the stars, moving on a hyperbolic trajectory, a path that will carry it through our system once, never to return. Discovered by the Asteroid Terrestrial Impact Last Alert System, or ATLAS, in early 2024, it has been an object of intense scientific interest. It is only the third such interstellar visitor ever confirmed. And as Tsuchinshan-ATLAS was performing its impossible display of light and motion, 3I Atlas did something subtle, yet equally impossible. It sped up. The deviation was minuscule, a change in its velocity of just a few meters per second. This resulted in a 0.01% deviation from its predicted hyperbolic trajectory. To the casual observer, this is a rounding error. To an orbital mechanic, it is a glaring red flag. The motion of celestial bodies under the influence of gravity is one of the most precisely understood and predictable phenomena in all of science. We can predict eclipses to the second, centuries in advance. We can guide a probe to a rendezvous with a distant moon with pinpoint accuracy. The paths of objects, like 3I Atlas, are modeled on supercomputers, accounting for the gravitational pull of the Sun, Jupiter, and every other significant body in the solar system. An unpredicted change in that path means only one thing: a non-gravitational force is at work. Some other push or pull is acting on the object. For a comet, the go-to explanation for such a force is, once again, outgassing. As the sun heats its icy surface, jets of gas erupt like tiny rocket thrusters, gently nudging the comet. This is a well-documented phenomenon for comets originating from our own Oort cloud. But 3I Atlas, like Oumuamua before it, showed no signs of this activity. Deep space observations from instruments like the Subaru telescope in Hawaii were specifically looking for a coma, the fuzzy halo of gas and dust that characterizes an active comet. They found nothing. The object remained a sharp, stellar point of light. It was accelerating without any visible propulsion. This is the exact same mystery that Oumuamua presented in 2017, an anomaly that to this day has not been satisfactorily explained by mainstream science. And now, it was happening again. The problem is not just the event itself, but its timing. Let's consider the probabilities. The chances of a known comet exhibiting a 100-fold brightening outburst are low but not impossible. The chances of an interstellar object exhibiting non-gravitational acceleration without a coma are also low, but it has happened once before. The statistical improbability arises when you demand that these two separate, highly unusual events occur within the same 48-hour window in the same solar system. The calculations become staggering. We are no longer dealing with two independent anomalies. We are forced to confront the possibility that they are linked. Is it a coincidence? In the cosmos, with its billions of objects and billions of years, coincidences certainly happen. But in the systematic investigation of an anomaly, coincidence is the hypothesis of last resort, the explanation you accept only after every other possible connection has been ruled out. Yet, this is precisely where the official scientific bodies have started and stopped. There has been no major statement from NASA, the European Space Agency, or any other national institution that even mentions the two events in the same breath. They are being treated as two completely isolated, unrelated phenomena. One is a cometary outburst. The other is a minor orbital deviation of an interstellar object. By placing them in separate bureaucratic and intellectual boxes, the need to explain the impossible coincidence vanishes. This is an act of deliberate scientific separation. It's akin to investigators finding two rare, identical poisons in two victims who died in the same house on the same night, and deciding to treat them as two separate, unrelated cases. The silence is not passive. It is an active choice to not connect the dots. Why would they do this? One reason might be the sheer difficulty of finding a natural explanation that links the two. What possible physical mechanism could connect a brightening Oort cloud comet near Mars with the acceleration of an interstellar object much farther out in the solar system? There are no known forces that could account for it. Gravity is too weak over those distances to create such a synchronized effect. The solar wind, or radiation pressure, affects all bodies, but not in such a specific and dramatic way. Any natural explanation, a wave of undiscovered particles sweeping through the system, a sudden change in the sun's output, would have produced a host of other observable effects on satellites, asteroids, and planets. We saw none of those. The phenomena were localized to just these two objects. This leaves us in a deeply uncomfortable position. If there is no natural, physical link between these two events, then the only remaining possibility is an artificial one. The idea that these two events were coordinated is so far outside the bounds of conventional science that it is institutionally untouchable. To even suggest it publicly would be career suicide for a mainstream scientist. And so, the easiest course of action is silence. Treat them as separate incidents. Publish separate papers. Issue separate press releases. Maintain the illusion of two distinct, manageable mysteries, rather than confronting one singular, incomprehensible one. The story of Comet Tsuchinshan-ATLAS, therefore, cannot be told in isolation. Its sudden brightening and course correction are only one half of a larger, more complex equation. The other half is the silent, ghost-like acceleration of 3I Atlas. It is the celestial echo, the second data point that turns a single anomaly into a pattern. When a single dog barks in the night, it can be dismissed. When two dogs in different houses start barking at the exact same time, for no apparent reason, you have to start considering that they are reacting to the same stimulus. The coordinated silence from the world's space agencies is their attempt to convince us we only heard one dog bark. They are hoping we don't look at the data from the other house, but the data exists. The orbital plots are public, the timing is undeniable, and the coincidence hangs in the air, a silent accusation against the simple story we are being told. The mystery of Tsuchinshan-ATLAS is not just about a comet, it's about a system-wide event that we are being encouraged to ignore. Let's return to the official explanation, the comfortable narrative anchor in this sea of anomalies. NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory stated the 100-fold brightening of Tsuchinshan-ATLAS was caused by sudden sublimation of volatile ices. This phrase sounds precise and scientific, and it is designed to end the conversation. But when we deconstruct it, when we apply the unforgiving laws of physics and chemistry to it, the explanation begins to unravel. We will do what the official statements have not. We will talk about the numbers. First, the energy. 100-fold increase in brightness for an object of this size and distance requires a colossal amount of energy to be released in a very short time. The nucleus of Tsuchinshan-ATLAS is estimated to be approximately 3.2 kilometers in diameter. Based on its luminosity and the physics of light reflection, the energy required to produce the observed flash is calculated to be in the region of 4.5 x 10^15 joules. That is 4.5 quadrillion joules. To put that number in a terrestrial context, it is roughly equivalent to the explosive yield of a 1 gigaton nuclear bomb, or about 20 times more powerful than the largest bomb ever detonated on Earth, the Tsar Bomba. The official theory posits that this biblical amount of energy came from the sun's heat vaporizing pockets of frozen gas. The problem is one of efficiency. The process of sublimation, turning a solid directly into a gas, requires a tremendous amount of thermal energy. For a sunbeam to penetrate the dark, insulating crust of a comet and trigger a runaway vaporization of subsurface ices on this scale is extraordinarily difficult. Most models of cometary physics predict that such an event would be far less energetic and far more gradual. To achieve the observed output, you would need a truly massive, perfectly situated reservoir of something extremely volatile, like solid carbon monoxide, buried just beneath a very thin, very weak crust. While not strictly impossible, it pushes the boundaries of what current models consider plausible. It requires the comet's internal structure to be perfectly arranged for a catastrophic explosion. It's a convenient but highly idealized scenario. But the energy budget is only the first problem. The second, more damning piece of evidence comes from spectroscopy. When a comet releases a cloud of gas, that gas is illuminated by the sun, and the elements within it absorb and re-emit light at very specific frequencies. By capturing the comet's light and splitting it into its constituent colors with a spectrometer, astronomers can read its chemical fingerprint. If the brightening was caused by the sublimation of volatile ices, the resulting spectrum should be dominated by the signatures of the molecules being released. We would expect to see strong emission bands of substances like cyanogen, Cn, and diatomic carbon, C2, which are the classic, unambiguous markers of cometary outgassing. Immediately following the outburst, multiple observatories, including the historic Lick Observatory on Mount Hamilton in California, performed this exact analysis. The results were deeply puzzling. The spectra they collected showed only minimal traces of cyanogen and carbon. The expected chemical fingerprints were almost entirely absent. The light from the comet was almost a pure reflection of the solar spectrum, indicating it was bouncing off a solid or dusty surface, not passing through a dense cloud of freshly released gas. This is a direct contradiction. The official explanation says a massive gas cloud erupted, creating the brightness. But the spectroscopic data says there was no significant gas cloud. Both cannot be true. This finding is critical because it undermines the very mechanism proposed by the authorities. It's like finding a massive crater in the ground and being told it was caused by a water explosion, only to run a chemical analysis of the site and find no trace of humidity. The cause and effect are disconnected. The third pillar of our deconstruction is a historical comparison. We have seen a comet undergo a massive outburst before. In October of 2007, a previously unremarkable comet named 17P Holmes stunned the world when it brightened by a factor of nearly 500,000, becoming a naked-eye object overnight. This was, and still is, the largest cometary outburst ever recorded. The cause was believed to be similar to what is proposed for Tsuchinshan-ATLAS, a massive outgassing event. But here is the crucial difference. When Comet Holmes erupted, it produced an enormous, visible, and rapidly expanding coma of dust and gas. Within weeks, this cloud had grown to be larger in volume than the sun itself. It was a ghostly, translucent sphere, the clear and undeniable evidence of a massive ejection of material. The event was a perfect illustration of cause and effect. A massive release of energy created a massive visible structure. Tsuchinshan-ATLAS did not do this. Its hundredfold brightening, while dramatic, was characterized by the exact opposite. Observations from the Very Large Telescope in Chile confirmed that the coma remained unusually compact, and the central condensation, the bright point of light at the nucleus, remained sharp and well-defined. There was no vast, expanding shell of debris. The light appeared, but the expected cloud of material that should have created it did not. So when we hold the normal outgassing theory up to scrutiny, it fails on three fundamental counts. The energy required is at the extreme upper limit of what models allow. The chemical evidence for a gas eruption is conspicuously missing, and the physical structure of the event directly contradicts our best documented historical precedent. The explanation does not fit the facts. It is a simple label applied to a complex event designed to quell curiosity rather than satisfy it. This forces us to ask a difficult question. If it wasn't a normal outgassing event, then what was it? The energy was real. The brightening was observed. But its characteristics, the lack of gas, the compact coma, are more consistent with a different kind of event. They are more like a massive release of energy from the surface itself, rather than from a subsurface pocket of gas. It was less like a geological eruption and more like a flashbulb going off. This possibility that the energy source was not a natural chemical process, but something else entirely, is not being discussed in any official capacity. It is too far outside the accepted framework. But the data, the spectra from LIC, the images from the VLT, continues to point in that direction. The official story is a story of convenience, one that uses familiar terms to describe something that is behaving in a profoundly unfamiliar way. The foundation of the official narrative is not made of stone. It is made of sand. And the tide of contradictory evidence is rising. If the explanation for the comet's brightness is built on a shaky foundation, the explanation for its movement, or lack thereof, is non-existent. Let's revisit the number, 3.5 microradians. This is the observed deviation in the comet's trajectory, a tiny but deeply significant course correction that has been met with institutional silence. The official outgassing theory implicitly suggests that this change in path was caused by the recoil from the eruption, the same way a fired rifle kicks back against your shoulder. This is the only known natural mechanism that could exert such a non-gravitational force. The problem is that the physics simply does not work. The numbers paint a picture of an event so powerful, so focused, it strains the limits of natural phenomena. To produce a thrust capable of altering the trajectory of a 3.2 kilometer wide body by 3.5 microradians, a colossal amount of mass must be ejected at high velocity in a single, focused direction. Calculations performed by independent orbital analysts, posted to astrophysics forums and preprint servers, provide a sense of the scale. For a jet of sublimated gas and dust to produce this specific thrust, it would require the ejection of over 500,000 metric tons of material. Let that number sink in. 500,000 metric tons. That is the mass of a modern supertanker, or roughly the weight of 100,000 adult elephants, vaporized and shot into space like a bullet from a gun. An event of this magnitude would not be subtle. It would not be a gentle puff of gas. It would be a cataclysmic, explosive remodeling of the comet's surface. The resulting jet of material would have been blindingly obvious to our instruments. For perspective, when NASA's Deep Impact probe slammed a 370 kilogram impactor into Comet Tempel 1 in 2005, the resulting flash was visible from Earth, and the ejected plume was studied for weeks. That was an object the size of a washing machine. We are now being asked to believe that Tsuchinshan-ATLAS ejected more than 1 million times that mass, and that this titanic eruption was somehow invisible. The Hubble Space Telescope, with its extraordinary resolving power, would not have missed it. The James Webb Space Telescope, designed to see the faint heat signatures of the early universe, would have easily detected the thermal bloom from such a massive, energetic plume. Yet, the observational record is silent. No such jet was ever imaged. No such plume was ever detected. We see the effect, the course correction, but the cause required by our laws of physics is nowhere to be found. This is a profound contradiction. It's a cosmic magic trick where the magician's hand is invisible. This leads us to the mathematical improbability of the maneuver itself. Let's assume for a moment that such a ghost-like, hyper-efficient thruster is possible in nature. The next question becomes one of direction. For an outgassing jet to be effective as a propulsive force, it must be highly focused. A diffuse, symmetrical explosion, like a firework, would push equally in all directions, resulting in a spectacular light show, but zero net change in the comet's trajectory. To change course, the thrust must be directional, like the nozzle of a rocket engine. The eruption would have had to occur at a single, specific point on the comet's rotating nucleus, and the jet would have had to maintain its cohesion for a significant period. The probability of a random geological fissure on a tumbling, irregularly shaped piece of ice and rock aligning itself so perfectly to produce a single, sustained, and efficient thrust vector is infinitesimally small. It's like expecting a volcanic eruption on Earth to launch a rock into a stable orbit around the moon. It's not just improbable, it's dynamically absurd. But the strangeness does not end there. When we analyze the specific nature of the 3.5 microradian course correction, a more detailed and puzzling picture emerges. The thrust vector was not random. It was perfectly aligned to produce a very specific change in the comet's orbit. It slightly increased the comet's orbital inclination. This means the maneuver tilted its path relative to the plane of the solar system, the flat disk where all the planets orbit. This is a highly inefficient and peculiar maneuver. If an object wanted to use a burst of thrust to get somewhere else in the solar system faster, it would apply that thrust along its direction of travel, prograde, or against it, retrograde. An inclination burn, pushing up or down out of the orbital plane, is one of the most energy-intensive maneuvers in orbital mechanics. It provides no benefit in terms of travel time to a perihelion pass. It doesn't significantly alter the comet's closest approach to the Sun or Earth. From the perspective of a natural chaotic event, it makes no sense. The energy was expended in a way that produced a dynamically expensive, observationally subtle, and seemingly pointless change to its orbit. There is no conceivable natural reason for this. A random outgassing event is far more likely to send a comet tumbling or to push it slightly along its existing path. A perfect, clean inclination burn suggests something else. It suggests intent. In the world of spacecraft engineering, this is a standard orbital maneuver, a plane change burn, executed with precision to reach a different destination or to establish a specific type of orbit, like a polar orbit around a planet. It is a hallmark of controlled, intelligent propulsion. To see a comet execute a perfect miniature version of it, powered by an invisible force of unimaginable power, is a data point that defies all conventional explanation. It is perhaps the single most powerful piece of evidence that what we are witnessing is not a natural phenomenon. The silence from the official channels on this specific point is deafening. They will discuss the brightness, but they will not discuss the burn. They will not release the high-resolution tracking data. They will not address the mathematical improbability of a 500,000-ton invisible jet producing a perfect orbital plane change. They are hoping that the numbers are too technical, the concepts too esoteric for public comprehension. They are hoping that we will see the flash of light and not ask about the impossible journey it has taken. But the numbers do not lie. The physics is unforgiving. A trajectory is a history written in the language of mathematics, and the history of Comet Tsuchinshan-ATLAS, in the 72 hours it changed everything, contains a chapter that seems to have been written not by the laws of nature, but by an unseen hand. The course correction is not a footnote to the story of the brightening. It may be the entire headline. As the professional astronomical community grappled with the impossible physics of the brightening and the course correction, a different kind of discovery was being made, not in the sterile clean rooms of a government facility, but in the cluttered basements and quiet backyards of hobbyists. A network of amateur radio astronomers, a dedicated and often overlooked community of citizen scientists, found the piece of the puzzle that elevated this mystery from a scientific curiosity to something far more profound. They found the signal. The first detection was made by a small, collaborative group in Europe, using a coordinated array of home-built radio telescopes. These are not the giant dishes of the Very Large Array, but modest setups, often built with repurposed satellite dishes and sophisticated software-defined radios. Their initial goal was simple: to detect the faint radio emissions from the hydroxyl, OH, radical in the comet's coma, a standard technique for measuring the water production of an active comet. They pointed their instruments at the comet's precise coordinates, tuned their receivers to the protected spectral band around 1.6 gigahertz, and began to listen. What they heard was not the faint, broad hiss of natural hydroxyl emissions. It was a sharp, structured, and repeating series of pulses. The signal was centered at exactly 1.665 gigahertz. This frequency is significant. It falls within the L-band of the radio spectrum, a relatively quiet neighborhood protected by international agreement for radio astronomy. Specifically, it is nestled right next to one of the primary spectral lines of the hydroxyl molecule. For decades, astronomers involved in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, or SETI, have hypothesized that an advanced civilization might choose such a cosmic waterhole to broadcast a signal. The logic is that water is essential for life as we know it, and the components of water, hydrogen and hydroxyl, broadcast at specific, universally recognized frequencies. It is a shared, natural signpost in the radio wilderness. To find a structured signal at this precise location is, at the very least, an extraordinary coincidence. But it was the signal structure that truly set it apart from any known natural source. The transmission consisted of a repeating pattern. First, a sequence of 5 distinct pulses, then a long pause of silence. The pulses were not uniform. They varied in duration, suggesting a form of simple binary encoding. The pause that followed was even more remarkable for its precision. It lasted for exactly 8.3 minutes, or 498 seconds, before the 5-pulse sequence repeated flawlessly. This is the calling card of an artificial transmission. Natural cosmic sources that produce radio pulses, like pulsars, are marvels of regularity, spinning with the precision of an atomic clock. However, their pulses are the result of a simple, sweeping beam of energy, like a lighthouse. They do not transmit complex, structured patterns of information like pulse, pulse, pause, pulse. And they certainly don't take regularly scheduled breaks lasting for minutes at a time. The structure of the Tsuchinshan-ATLAS signal is inconsistent with any known astrophysical phenomenon. It doesn't look like a pulsar, a magnetar, a quasar, or any form of stellar or galactic radio burst. It looks, for all intents and purposes, like it was designed. One of the most critical steps in validating such a discovery is confirming its origin. A stray signal from a terrestrial satellite, a military radar, or even a faulty microwave oven can easily mimic a cosmic broadcast. The definitive test is to measure the signal's Doppler shift. As an object moves towards or away from an observer, its radio waves are compressed or stretched, changing their frequency in a predictable way. The amateur network that first detected the signal used this principle to stunning effect. They measured the slight shift in the 1.665 gigahertz frequency over several hours. When they compared this measured Doppler curve to the one predicted for Comet Tsuchinshan-ATLAS, based on its known velocity and trajectory, the two matched perfectly. The correlation was unmistakable. This was not a local interference. It was not a satellite. The signal was coming from the comet, and only from the comet. It was moving through space at the same speed and in the same direction, a stowaway on a cosmic iceberg. The amateur group, aware of the magnitude of their finding, followed standard scientific protocol. They documented their methodology, their equipment, and their data, and posted their initial findings on a well-respected online forum for radio astronomy. The reaction was immediate. Within hours, other amateur observers in North America and Australia had confirmed the signal, independently verifying its existence, its structure, and its origin. For a brief period, there was a sense of euphoric, collaborative discovery. This was citizen science at its finest, a moment when passionate amateurs with modest equipment made a discovery that the world's billion-dollar observatories had missed. But then the silence fell. The major official channels, organizations like the CD Institute, whose entire mission is to search for signals just like this, remained completely quiet. There was no public statement, no press release, no request for an allocation of time on major instruments like the Green Bank Telescope or the Allen Telescope Array to confirm the finding. This was a profound and deeply puzzling inaction. The protocol for a credible SETI candidate signal has been established for decades. First, verify the signal with independent observatories. Second, eliminate all possible sources of terrestrial interference. Third, if the signal remains, announce the finding to the world. The amateur community had successfully completed the first step, but the professional community, the institutions with the resources and authority to complete the process, refused to engage. They did not debunk the finding. They simply ignored it. They acted as if the data did not exist. This refusal to investigate is, in many ways, more suspicious than an outright denial. A denial would require counter-evidence, a debate. Ignoring the signal requires only silence. It allows the official, incomplete narrative of normal outgassing to persist simply by starving the new, inconvenient data of the institutional oxygen it needs to be taken seriously by the wider world. The signal the amateurs found is the Rosetta Stone of this entire event. It potentially links the unexplained energy of the brightening and the unexplained propulsion of the course correction into a single, coherent, and terrifying picture, that of a functioning technology. And it is this piece of the puzzle that the authorities seem most determined to keep hidden. In any complex investigation, the actions of the institutions involved can be as revealing as the physical evidence itself. While the public narrative from NASA remained fixed on normal outgassing, behind the scenes, a very different and far more confusing picture began to emerge. The official story, it turns out, was not a unified one. Instead of a single, coordinated scientific consensus, we find three major space agencies presenting contradictory narratives, imposing coordinated data blackouts, and acting in a manner that suggests not calm confidence, but barely contained panic. The first crack in the official facade appeared not as a public statement, but as a leak. An internal memorandum, allegedly originating from the European Space Agency's Operations Center in Darmstadt, Germany, was posted anonymously to a secure messaging board used by aerospace engineers. The memo, dated October 14th, just hours after a first amateur radio signal reports, allegedly instructed all ESA personnel and affiliated astronomers to refer to the Tsuchinshan-ATLAS event exclusively as a fragmentation event. This is a significant and direct contradiction of NASA's official position. A fragmentation event is not the same as an outgassing event. It implies that the comet's nucleus has broken apart, exposing a large surface area of fresh ice, which then causes the brightening. While both are natural phenomena, they are physically distinct processes with different observational signatures. For one of the world's leading space agencies to be internally promoting a completely different physical explanation for the same event is highly irregular. It suggests a lack of coordination at best, and a deliberate attempt to create conflicting narratives at worst. Why would ESA push a fragmentation story? Perhaps because a fragmenting nucleus could, in theory, create a more chaotic and unpredictable thrust, offering a potential, albeit weak, explanation for the trajectory deviation that NASA's simpler outgassing model could not. It feels like an attempt to find a more robust natural explanation, even if it meant contradicting their American counterparts. It is an act of institutional divergence, a sign that behind the calm public face, there was no single agreed-upon story. But the most damning evidence of a coordinated effort is not what the agency said, but what they hid. Both NASA and ESA operate a network of giant radio antennas spread across the globe. NASA's is called the Deep Space Network, or DSN, with facilities in California, Spain, and Australia. ESA's is called STRAC, the European Space Tracking Network. These are the ears of humanity, the sensitive instruments we use to communicate with our farthest robotic probes. They are also incredibly powerful radio telescopes, capable of detecting signals far fainter than any amateur setup. Following the initial amateur reports of the 1.665 gigahertz signal, the public data feeds from both of these networks, which normally provide a live look at which antennas are tracking, which objects were altered. The tracking schedules for the antennas that would have been in a position to observe Tsuchinshan-ATLAS were suddenly marked as undergoing scheduled maintenance. This was not maintenance that had been announced weeks or months in advance, as is standard practice for such critical infrastructure. It was an impromptu, system-wide shutdown of public transparency, happening at the exact moment the most important astronomical signal in human history may have been detected. Let's be precise about the timing. The first credible, data-backed post from the European Amateur Astronomy Group appeared online at approximately 0130 UTC on October 14th. The public data feeds for the DSN's Goldstone and Madrid complexes went dark at 03:00 UTC, exactly 90 minutes later. Estrak's New Norcia station in Australia followed suit 20 minutes after that. This is not a coincidence. This is a reaction. This is the digital equivalent of drawing the curtains and locking the doors. It suggests that the agencies did not dismiss the amateur findings. On the contrary, it suggests they took them so seriously that their first priority was to prevent any further independent verification of the signal using their own publicly accessible systems. They wanted to be the sole keepers of whatever data their superior instruments were collecting. The silence was not one of ignorance, but of control. The official excuse of scheduled maintenance is transparently false. The statistical probability of multiple, independent, continent-spanning antenna networks, all requiring emergency, unscheduled maintenance at the same time, is practically zero. The only event connecting them was the comet and the signal it was producing. This coordinated data blackout is the single most powerful piece of evidence that the institutions know far more than they are letting on. It is an admission of significance through an act of concealment. If the signal was just noise or a misinterpretation by amateurs, the professional response would be to release their own, more sensitive data to debunk it. You fight bad data with good data. You don't respond to a potential scientific revolution by unplugging the machines and claiming they're broken. This pattern of behavior, contradictory internal narratives, and coordinated external secrecy reveals a deep institutional schism. On one hand, the public relations departments are tasked with maintaining a facade of normalcy with simple, reassuring explanations. On the other, the operational departments are taking extraordinary measures to control the flow of information and prevent independent analysis. It is the signature of an organization that is confronted with a reality it is not prepared to share. The narrative of one narrative, three agencies, is a fallacy. What we see instead is a fractured, disorganized, and reactive response. We see NASA saying one thing, ESA allegedly saying another, and both of them acting in a way that suggests neither story is the complete truth. They are behaving not like scientific bodies engaged in open discovery, but like intelligence agencies managing a crisis. The narrative is not the priority. Containment is. And in this case, the object of containment is not a physical threat, but a piece of information, a signal in the dark that threatens to rewrite everything we thought we knew about our place in the universe. When institutions fall silent, it is often the voices of individuals that cut through the quiet, revealing the deep fractures in the scientific consensus. The case of Tsuchinshan-ATLAS is no exception. While the official press offices of NASA and ESA maintained a rigid, unified message of "nothing to see here," a fierce and vital debate was erupting among the world's top astronomers and physicists. This was not a fringe argument relegated to obscure blogs. This was a fundamental disagreement between respected scientists playing out in public, showcasing the deep divide between cautious institutional dogma and the pull of extraordinary evidence. On one side of this divide stands a figure who has become synonymous with the scientific search for extraterrestrial intelligence, Dr. Avi Loeb, a theoretical physicist from Harvard University and the head of the Galileo Project. Dr. Loeb is no stranger to controversy, having famously argued that the interstellar object Oumuamua was likely a piece of alien technology. His approach is one of rigorous, evidence-based speculation, a willingness to consider all possibilities, no matter how unconventional, as long as they are consistent with the data. Shortly after the amateur radio findings and the trajectory analysis began to circulate, Dr. Loeb issued a public statement, not through Harvard's press office, but directly on his personal blog, a platform he uses to engage in open scientific discourse. His words were measured, but their implication was explosive. He wrote, and I quote, "The combination of a 100-fold energetic outburst with minimal spectroscopic signs of outgassing, a concurrent non-gravitational trajectory change indicative of a plane change maneuver, and a structured, narrow-band radio signal at a cosmically significant frequency is highly anomalous. It warrants immediate, extraordinary investigation using our most powerful astronomical assets." He went on to say, "To dismiss any of these data points or to treat them as unrelated coincidences is not a conservative scientific position. It is an unscientific one. We must follow the evidence wherever it leads." This is the voice of a scientist demanding that the full spectrum of data be addressed. He did not claim it was aliens. He simply stated that the collection of evidence was so strange, so inconsistent with known natural phenomena, that it demanded an exceptional response. He was calling for transparency, for the use of instruments like the James Webb Space Telescope and the Green Bank Telescope to be turned towards the comet, a call which, to this day, has not been publicly answered. On the other side of this chasm stands the institutional voice. This voice was embodied by a JPL spokesperson during a short, impromptu press briefing held on October 15th, ostensibly to give an update on the Mars rover mission. When cornered by a reporter with a question about the growing controversy around Tsuchinshan-ATLAS, the spokesperson, a veteran of NASA public relations, delivered a masterclass in institutional deflection. They stated, "We are aware of the intense public interest in this comet. Our experts have analyzed the data from the brightening event, and we are confident that established models of cometary behavior, such as cryovolcanic outgassing, can explain these observations." When pressed specifically about the trajectory deviation and the amateur radio signals, the response was telling. There is a great deal of raw data circulating, and it is the job of the scientific process to vet that data rigorously. At this time, the primary, verified observation remains the luminous outburst, which is consistent with natural cometary activity. This statement is a work of art. It does not deny the existence of the other data points. It simply relegates them to a lesser status, calling them raw and unvetted, even as multiple independent sources had confirmed them. It creates a false hierarchy of evidence, where the one piece of data that fits the simple story, the brightening, is labeled primary and verified, while the pieces that complicate the story are dismissed as needing more study. It is a classic tactic for delaying and deflecting, for kicking the can down the road until public interest wanes. The contrast between these two statements highlights the fundamental divide. Dr. Loeb sees a collection of interrelated anomalies that point to a new phenomenon. The JPL spokesperson sees a single primary event surrounded by unconfirmed noise. One is a call to action. The other is a call for patience, which in this context is a synonym for inaction. This disagreement is not just a matter of opinion. It represents a philosophical clash about the very nature of scientific discovery. Do we prioritize established models and treat contradictory data with extreme skepticism, risking the possibility of missing a paradigm-shifting discovery? Or do we prioritize anomalous data and question our established models, risking the possibility of chasing a ghost? The institutional position is almost always the former. Large, government-funded organizations are inherently conservative. They are built to manage risk, not to embrace radical new ideas. An extraordinary claim requires extraordinary evidence. And for an institution like NASA, the bar for extraordinary is set almost impossibly high. But for scientists like Dr. Loeb, the argument is that the evidence is already extraordinary. The coincidence of the brightening, the burn, and the broadcast is the evidence. To ignore their confluence is the greater scientific sin. The fractured scientific consensus is therefore not a sign of failure, but a sign that the data from Tsuchinshan-ATLAS is genuinely revolutionary. It has stressed the scientific method to its breaking point. It has pitted the guardians of the old paradigm against the explorers of the new. The silence from the institutions is not a sign that all the experts agree on the outgassing theory. On the contrary, it is a sign that they so profoundly disagree that the only way to maintain a semblance of control is to enforce a policy of public silence, hoping the storm of debate will pass. But with every passing hour, as the comet draws closer, and as more independent researchers analyze the publicly available data, that silence becomes less a position of authority and more a confession of bewilderment. When the official channels fall silent and the scientific community is publicly divided, the narrative battleground shifts to the open forums of the internet. It is here, in the digital trenches of astronomy forums, social media, and video platforms, that we can observe a more subtle yet deeply unsettling pattern of information control. It is one thing for an institution to refuse to comment. It is another entirely to see the digital trail of the initial discoverers systematically erased. This suggests a coordinated effort, not just to ignore the inconvenient data, but to actively suppress it. Our investigation into this digital trail begins with the very forum where the European Amateur Radio Astronomy Group first posted their groundbreaking findings. It was a well-respected, independently run message board for serious astronomers. The initial post, which we have preserved through screenshots, was a model of scientific rigor. It detailed their methodology, their equipment, the precise frequency and structure of the signal, and included their raw data files for others to analyze. For approximately 12 hours, the thread was a vibrant hub of collaborative science. Other astronomers confirmed the findings, debated possible natural origins, and discussed strategies for further observation. Then, without warning, the entire thread vanished. Users who tried to access it were met with a 404 not found error. A short time later, a forum moderator posted a brief, generic statement citing a violation of community guidelines regarding the promotion of unsubstantiated claims. This was a stunning act of censorship. The claims were not unsubstantiated. They were backed by verifiable data that had already been independently confirmed by multiple users on that very forum. To label a data-driven discussion as a community guidelines violation is a gross mischaracterization. It is the kind of heavy-handed moderation typically reserved for spam or personal attacks, not for the presentation of new scientific evidence. When users created new threads to ask why the original had been deleted, those too were quickly locked and removed. The digital conversation was being actively and systematically shut down at its point of origin. This was not an isolated incident. A similar pattern played out across other platforms. A prominent YouTuber, an astrophysicist with a doctorate who runs a popular educational channel, produced a calm, evidence-based video outlining the anomalies of Tsuchinshan-ATLAS. The video, which received hundreds of thousands of views in its first day, presented the brightening, the trajectory deviation, and the amateur radio signal as a cohesive, unexplained mystery. It was not sensationalist. It simply laid out the publicly available facts and asked the same questions the scientific community was asking behind closed doors. Within 48 hours, the video was demonetized by the platform. The official reason given was, once again, promoting unsubstantiated claims. The creator shared a screenshot of the notification they received, which offered no specific details about what part of their evidence-based presentation was deemed unsubstantiated. The financial incentive to cover the story was removed. This is a powerful, if indirect, form of censorship. It sends a clear message to other content creators. Covering this topic in a way that deviates from the normal outgassing narrative is not welcome and will be financially penalized. This creates a chilling effect, discouraging further mainstream discussion and ensuring the official story remains the dominant, most visible one. The pattern is clear and deeply troubling. A narrative is being enforced not through open debate and superior evidence, but through moderation policies, algorithmic suppression, and financial disincentives. The goal appears to be to scrub the public square of the most compelling evidence, the structured radio signal, and to leave only the sanitized, institutionally approved story in place. It is a subtle, distributed form of censorship that is difficult to pin on any single actor. The forum moderators can claim they were simply enforcing their rules. The video platform can hide behind its opaque algorithms and policies. No single government agency needs to issue a direct order. But the cumulative effect is the same: a coordinated suppression of a legitimate scientific discovery. Who is behind this? It is impossible to know for certain. It could be the result of overzealous, volunteer moderators who genuinely believe they are protecting their communities from misinformation, despite the evidence. It could be the result of automated content filters on large platforms that are poorly equipped to distinguish between genuine scientific anomaly and baseless conspiracy. Or it could be something more deliberate. Anonymous sources within the tech industry have spoken of back channels through which government agencies can flag content for review by major platforms. While this is often used for legitimate national security concerns, it is a system that is ripe for abuse. Could it be that the same institutions enforcing the public silence on the comet are quietly using these channels to flag dissenting online content as well? We cannot prove this, but the timing and the consistency of the suppression across independent platforms are highly suspicious. It suggests a guiding hand, a common impetus that is shaping the digital conversation from behind the scenes. This digital trail of deleted data and suppressed content is a crucial part of the investigation. It shows that the information war over Tsuchinshan-ATLAS is being fought not just in press releases and scientific journals, but in the comment sections and content queues of the internet. The silence is not merely a passive absence of information. It is an actively maintained state. It is a wall being built and repaired in real time, designed to keep the full, unfiltered truth of this cosmic mystery contained. The very fact that the evidence needs to be suppressed is perhaps the most compelling argument for its validity. To understand the present, we must often look to the past. The institutional response to the Tsuchinshan-ATLAS anomaly, the initial confusion, the swift imposition of a simple but incomplete natural explanation, and the steadfast refusal to engage with more exotic hypotheses is not a new phenomenon. We have seen this exact playbook before. In 2017, the astronomical community was confronted with a mystery that, in many ways, was a dress rehearsal for the one we are witnessing now. The mystery was a small, cigar-shaped object tumbling through our solar system on a trajectory that proved it came from interstellar space. It was the very first of its kind ever detected, and it was given the Hawaiian name Oumuamua, meaning a messenger from afar arriving first. From the moment it was discovered, Oumuamua behaved strangely. It was highly elongated, with a shape unlike any known asteroid or comet. Spectroscopic analysis showed it had a dark, reddish surface, but revealed no hint of the coma of gas and dust that should have surrounded it as the sun's heat warmed its surface. This was the first major anomaly. If it was an icy comet, it should have been outgassing. If it was a dry rock, it should not have had such a peculiar shape. Then came the second, more profound anomaly. As astronomers tracked Oumuamua's path, with incredible precision, they discovered it was accelerating. It was moving away from the sun slightly faster than the laws of gravity could account for. This was a clear, unambiguous detection of non-gravitational acceleration, the very same phenomenon we are now seeing with 3I Atlas. And just like with 3I Atlas, there was no visible means of propulsion. There was no cometary tail, no jets of gas, no plume of dust. The object was pushing itself forward with an invisible engine. The scientific community was forced to find an explanation. The official narrative that eventually coalesced was that the acceleration was caused by the outgassing of something invisible, like solid hydrogen or nitrogen icebergs, which would not be easily detectable by our telescopes. This theory, while clever, is deeply problematic. Solid hydrogen requires incredibly cold temperatures to exist, and it's highly unlikely that an object could maintain that state over an interstellar journey lasting millions of years. The nitrogen iceberg theory, proposed later, was more plausible but required Oumuamua to be a pristine fragment chipped off a Pluto-like exoplanet, a highly specific and unprovable origin story. Notice the pattern. An object exhibits anomalous acceleration. There is no visible outgassing. The official explanation posits the existence of invisible outgassing. It is an argument from absence, a ghost in the machine invoked to preserve the naturalistic paradigm. Dr. Avi Loeb, then as now, offered a more direct interpretation. He argued that the simplest explanation, the one that fit all the data without invoking invisible forces, was that Oumuamua was an artifact. Its shape was consistent with a thin, light sail-like object, and its acceleration could be explained by the gentle pressure of sunlight pushing on a large, lightweight surface. It was a hypothesis that was scientifically sound, yet it was met with widespread institutional ridicule. The playbook was executed perfectly. First, the anomaly is acknowledged. Second, a series of complex, sometimes convoluted natural explanations are proposed. Third, the most exotic but potentially simplest explanation, that it is a piece of technology, is framed as unscientific and beyond the pale of serious discussion. The narrative is successfully managed. The mystery is neatly packaged as a puzzling but likely natural phenomenon, and the scientific world moves on. We are seeing a direct repeat of this institutional response pattern with Tsuchinshan-ATLAS. The initial anomaly, the brightening, is met with the standard issue outgassing explanation, just as Oumuamua's acceleration was. When further data complicates the picture, the trajectory change, the lack of a coma, the radio signal, this data is not used to question the initial explanation. Instead, the initial explanation is held up as the established truth, and the contradictory data is either ignored or labeled as unconfirmed. It is a systematic refusal to allow the narrative to become more complex. The question this historical precedent forces us to ask is a deeply uncomfortable one. Is this a playbook for scientific caution, or is it a playbook for control? Is it a genuine, good faith effort to avoid jumping to conclusions, or is it a standardized protocol for handling inconvenient astronomical data that points towards non-human intelligence? If it is the latter, it would imply that these institutions have a long-standing policy for managing public perception in the event of a potential first contact scenario. It would not be a conspiracy in the sense of a shadowy room of people making decisions, but rather an emergent, systemic behavior. The system itself, the way funding is allocated, the way papers are peer-reviewed, the way press releases are vetted, is designed to reject high-impact, paradigm-shifting ideas. The career risk for a NASA scientist to publicly entertain the idea of an alien probe is immense, while the risk of proposing a convoluted but natural explanation is zero. The system incentivizes the safe answer, even when it fits the data poorly. The echoes of Oumuamua are a warning. We have been here before. We have seen an object defy our understanding of physics. We have seen the scientific establishment circle the wagons and produce an explanation that raises more questions than it answers. And we have seen them successfully wait out the storm of public interest. The difference this time is the scale and clarity of the evidence. Oumuamua was a single, silent object that moved in a strange way. Tsuchinshan-ATLAS is a loud, active, and complex event involving a dramatic energy release, a precise maneuver, and a structured signal, all happening in concert with a second anomalous interstellar object. The playbook is the same, but the data it is trying to contain is far more explosive. The question is whether this time the playbook will fail. In any investigation that involves a series of strange events, there comes a point where we must step back from the individual pieces of evidence and ask a simple, powerful question. What are the odds? Coincidences happen, but not all coincidences are created equal. Some are so profoundly unlikely that to continue calling them coincidences is an act of willful ignorance. The events surrounding Tsuchinshan-ATLAS have now crossed that threshold. We are going to walk through the mathematics of coincidence, slowly and methodically, to understand the sheer statistical mountain that the official, naturalistic explanation must climb. Let us begin with the first event, the 100-fold brightening of the comet. Cometary outbursts are a known, if infrequent, phenomenon. Based on decades of observational data, astronomers can estimate the probability of such an event. For a long-period comet of this specific class and size, a sudden brightening of 5 magnitudes or more is a rare occurrence. Historical surveys, like those conducted by the Lincoln Near-Earth Asteroid Research Linear Project, suggest that the probability of such an event for any given comet of this type is roughly 1 in 5,000 per year. This is a low probability, but it is far from impossible. In a solar system with thousands of known comets, we would expect to see such an event every few years. On its own, the brightening is unusual, but not unbelievable. Now, let's add the second major anomaly, the simultaneous non-gravitational acceleration of the interstellar object, 3I ATLAS. Estimating the probability of this is more difficult, as we have a much smaller sample size of interstellar visitors. However, we can make a reasonable estimate. We have now observed 3 such objects, Oumuamua, Borisov, and 3I ATLAS. Of these 3, 2 have exhibited anomalous acceleration without a visible coma. That's a startlingly high ratio, but let's be extremely conservative. Let's assume that such events are incredibly rare, perhaps happening to only 1 in 100 interstellar objects that pass through our system. Given the rate at which we are now discovering these objects, the probability of one of them exhibiting this behavior within any given 48-hour window is vanishingly small. A generous calculation, based on the volume of space being monitored and the expected flux of interstellar objects, puts the odds at less than 1 in 2.7 million. This is now moving into the realm of the profoundly improbable. To believe in coincidence, you must now believe that a 1 in 5,000 event and a 1 in 2.7 million event just happen to occur at the same time, for unrelated reasons. The combined probability is now in the tens of billions to 1. It is like winning a state lottery and being struck by lightning on the same day. It is possible, but any rational investigator would immediately start looking for a connection between the 2 events. But we are not finished. We must now add the third and most significant anomaly to our calculation, the structured radio signal at 1.665 gigahertz. This is where the mathematics of coincidence breaks down entirely and enters the realm of the absurd. According to all known physics, the probability of a natural cometary outburst also producing a structured, narrow-band, repeating radio signal containing pattern information is 0. It is not just improbable, it is considered physically impossible. There is no known, understood, or even hypothesized natural mechanism that can account for it. A chaotic explosion of ice and rock does not spontaneously generate a coherent, information-rich radio broadcast on a protected frequency. To do so would be like expecting a volcanic eruption to spell out Shakespeare in an ash cloud. Therefore, to maintain a belief in the official story, you must accept a series of cascading improbabilities. You must believe that a 1 in 5,000 cometary outburst occurred. You must believe that in the same 48-hour window, a completely unrelated 1 in 2.7 million interstellar event occurred. And you must believe that, simultaneously, the comet began to produce a signal with a natural probability of 0. The intellectual gymnastics required to hold this position are staggering. It requires more faith than any of the so-called exotic hypotheses. The argument that all of this is a coincidence is, from a purely statistical standpoint, the most outlandish and irrational explanation on the table. This is why the institutional silence is so critical to their strategy. They cannot win this argument in an open forum. They cannot defend these numbers. Any public debate on the combined probabilities would immediately expose the weakness of the "it's all a coincidence" argument. So, they don't have the debate. They break the problem apart. They address the brightening with one press release. They ignore the acceleration of the second object. They dismiss the radio signal as unvetted noise. By treating each anomaly in isolation, they avoid the damning mathematics of their combination. They are asking us to look at 3 separate trees so that we never see the forest. Let's put this in perspective with a final analogy. Imagine you are investigating a house fire. The fire department says it was an electrical fault, a 1 in 5,000 chance for a house of that age. But you also discover that on the same night, the house was struck by a meteorite, a 1 in 2.7 million chance. And then you find a note, written in gasoline on the lawn, that says, "I did this." The official explanation is asking you to believe that the electrical fault caused the fire, the meteorite strike was a bizarre coincidence, and the note on the lawn is just a meaningless scribble. Any rational investigator would immediately conclude that the note, the meteorite, and the fire are all part of the same single event, and that this event was not an accident. The brightening is the fire. The acceleration of 3I-ATLAS is the meteorite. The radio signal is the signed confession on the lawn. The mathematics of coincidence does not allow for any other rational conclusion. We are not looking at a series of unfortunate, unrelated natural events. We are looking at a pattern, and that pattern has a message. Let us assemble the pieces of the puzzle, not as a random collection of curiosities, but as the architecture of a deliberate deception. When we look at the technical impossibility, the convenient timing, and the anonymous whispers from behind the institutional curtain, the anatomy of the silence becomes clear. It is not a passive void, but an active, constructed wall designed to shield the public from a reality that our institutions are not prepared to confront. The first pillar of this architecture is the foundation of technical impossibility. As we have deconstructed, the official outgassing explanation fails at every critical juncture. The energy budget for the 100-fold brightening is extreme. The spectroscopic evidence for a gas cloud is missing. The physics required for the 3.5 microradian course correction, an invisible, hyper-efficient ejection of 500,000 metric tons of material, violates our understanding of both thermodynamics and celestial mechanics. It is an explanation that does not explain. It is a scientific-sounding label placed over a black box. This is not an oversight. The scientists at NASA and ESA are among the most brilliant in the world. They have done these same calculations. They have seen the same contradictory spectra. They know, with a certainty that likely keeps them awake at night, that their public explanation does not fit their own data. The persistence of this technically impossible narrative is therefore not a mistake. It is a policy. It is a decision to prioritize a simple, non-threatening story over a complex, paradigm-shattering truth. The second pillar is the convenient timing of the information control. Let's revisit that critical 90-minute window. The amateur radio astronomers post their verified, data-backed discovery of the structured signal. 90 minutes later, the public data feeds for the Deep Space Network are taken offline under the guise of scheduled maintenance. This is the timing of a reactive, not a proactive strategy. It tells us that the institutions were caught off guard. They did not know about the signal until the amateurs found it. Their immediate reaction was not one of scientific curiosity, but of damage control. Their first instinct was to cut off the flow of data, to prevent further independent verification, and to ensure they could analyze the signal in private. This is the behavior of an organization that has just been confronted with a reality for which it has no protocol. The subsequent suppression of online discussion, the forum post deletions, the video demonetization, follows this same reactive pattern. The actions are taken after. The information has begun to spread in an attempt to put the genie back in the bottle. This timing is crucial because it rules out the idea of a long-running, pre-planned conspiracy. Instead, it paints a picture of a real-time, chaotic, and almost desperate attempt to manage a crisis as it unfolds. They are not following an ancient, secret plan. They are making up the rules as they go along, and their primary rule is control the narrative at all costs. The third and final pillar is the anonymous leak, the whisper through the wall. In any large organization that is trying to contain a powerful secret, there will always be individuals for whom the truth is more important than their career. Shortly after the DSN data blackout, an anonymous post appeared on a highly technical physics forum. The poster claimed to be a technician working at the DSN's Goldstone complex in California. Their post was brief and laden with technical jargon, but its message was chillingly clear. They claimed to have been on shift when the directive came down to take the 70-meter dish, DSS-14, off its scheduled track of the Voyager 1 probe and point it at Tsuchinshan-ATLAS. They claimed that the signal was not only real, but that its signal-to-noise ratio was incredibly high, far stronger and clearer than the amateur data suggested. The post ended with a single, haunting sentence. The signal was unambiguously artificial before the public feed was cut. We cannot, of course, verify the identity or the claims of this anonymous poster. To do so would be to risk their career and well-being. But the details in the post, the specific dish mentioned, the technical language used to describe the signal's characteristics, were highly consistent with what a DSN technician would know. Whether the leak is real or a clever fabrication, it serves as a powerful symbol of the tension that must exist within these organizations. It represents the voice of the individual conscience struggling against the weight of institutional silence. It tells us that behind the monolithic facade of the official story, there are men and women who are seeing the data, who know the truth, and who are struggling with the burden of that knowledge. When we put these three pillars together, the technically impossible explanation, the conveniently timed data suppression, and the anonymous confirmation from within, the structure is undeniable. We are witnessing the anatomy of a cover-up. It is not necessarily a malicious one. It may be driven by a paternalistic fear of public panic, or by a genuine scientific paralysis in the face of the unknown. But it is a cover-up nonetheless. They are actively hiding data, promoting a knowingly incomplete explanation, and suppressing public discourse. They are treating the citizens of Earth not as partners in discovery, but as children who must be protected from a complex and frightening truth. The silence is not empty. It is a carefully constructed edifice, and by examining its architecture, we can begin to see the shape of the truth it is designed to hide. Let us now move past the institutional silence and the mathematical improbabilities and focus on the one piece of hard evidence that cannot be easily dismissed or explained away: the signal itself. If we treat this signal not as noise, but as a deliberate transmission, we can begin an attempt to decode its meaning. This is not an exercise in wild speculation, but a methodical analysis based on the fundamental principles of physics and mathematics, the only truly universal languages. The first layer of meaning is the choice of frequency, 1.665 gigahertz. As we noted, this is not a random spot on the radio dial. It is a cosmically significant channel located in the quiet waterhole right next to the hydroxyl spectral line. But the significance runs deeper. Physicists have long proposed a set of magic frequencies that would be logical choices for a civilization trying to establish interstellar contact. One of the most famous of these is the hydrogen line frequency, 1.420 GHz, multiplied by the mathematical constant pi, p. If you perform that calculation, 1.420 multiplied by 3.14159, you get 4.46 GHz. Another is the hydrogen line frequency divided by pi, which is 0.45 GHz. But a third, less discussed, but equally elegant proposal is the hydrogen frequency plus the hydroxyl frequency, 1.665 GHz, which equals 3.085 GHz. The signal from Tsuchinshan-ATLAS is not at this combined frequency, but it is precisely at one of its components. More intriguingly, 1.665 GHz is very close to the hydrogen frequency, multiplied by the square root of phi, the golden ratio, approximately 1.618, a fundamental mathematical constant related to growth patterns in nature. The exact frequency is rich with mathematical and physical resonance, suggesting a choice that is deliberate, intelligent, and designed to be recognized as non-random. The second layer of meaning is the structure of the 5 pulses. The amateur observers noted that the pulses were of 2 distinct durations, a short pulse and a long pulse. This is the unmistakable hallmark of binary code, the language of all digital computers. We can assign the short pulse the value of 0 and the long pulse the value of 1. When we analyze the sequence of the 5 pulses that were repeatedly broadcast, we find a consistent pattern. According to the data logs from the European group, the pattern was long, short, long, short, long. In binary, this translates to 10101. This is where the analysis moves from radio astronomy to mathematics. What is the significance of the number 10101? In our base 10 system, it is 10,101. In binary, the number 10101 is equivalent to the number 21 in our decimal system. Why transmit the number 21? Perhaps it's a reference to the 21 centimeter wavelength of the hydrogen line, the most fundamental yardstick in radio astronomy. Perhaps it's a count of something. Perhaps it's the 21st letter of our alphabet, U. Or maybe we are reading it wrong. What if the 5 pulses are not a single number, but a representation of a fundamental mathematical truth? The number 21 is a Fibonacci number. It is also a triangular number. But the binary string 10101 has another interesting property. It is a palindrome. It reads the same forwards and backward, a simple and elegant way to demonstrate that the pattern is not an accident. The third layer is the pause, the period of silence between the transmissions, exactly 8.3 minutes or 498 seconds. This is not a random interval. A natural phenomenon might pulse with a period of seconds or milliseconds, but a multi-minute high-precision pause is mechanically and astrophysically bizarre. This interval is likely part of the message itself. What could it signify? 498 seconds. The number seems arbitrary at first, but in physics, time is often related to frequency. The inverse of 498 seconds is a frequency of approximately 0.002 Hertz. Does this frequency correspond to anything meaningful? Perhaps, but it's also possible the number itself is the message. Is it a countdown, a coordinate, a waiting period for a response? The pause is as much a part of the signal structure as the pulses themselves. The final layer of our analysis must be to rigorously exclude all possible natural mimics. Could some exotic, undiscovered natural phenomenon create such a signal? Let's consider the candidates. Magnetars, a type of neutron star with an incredibly powerful magnetic field, can produce intense radio bursts. However, these bursts are typically broad spectrum, lasting for milliseconds, and while some show quasi-periodic behavior, they do not produce information-rich, structured patterns like the one we see here. Jupiter's interaction with its moon Io produces powerful, narrow-band radio storms, so-called Jovian dam emissions. But these are tied to Jupiter's rotation and Io's orbital position, and their frequencies drift and slide in a complex but ultimately natural way. They do not hold a single, steady frequency with the precision observed from Tsuchinshan-ATLAS. The most damning evidence against any natural source is the signal's incredibly narrow bandwidth. The amateur observers measured it to be less than 10 Hertz wide. Natural radio emissions are invariably broad, smeared out across a wide range of frequencies by the chaotic thermal and magnetic processes that create them. A signal less than 10 Hertz wide is the hallmark of an artificial transmitter, an oscillator designed to pour all its energy into a single, pure frequency. When we combine these layers, the mathematically significant frequency, the binary encoded palindromic message, the precise, long-duration pause, and the impossibly narrow bandwidth, the conclusion becomes inescapable. We are not looking at a natural phenomenon. We are looking at a piece of technology. The signal is a deliberate, structured, and intelligent broadcast. It is a message in a bottle, thrown not across an ocean, but across the void between the stars. And the message, in its simplest form, may be nothing more than, "We are here." The 5 pulses, the silent wait. A cosmic doorbell, rung with mathematical precision, now waiting for someone on the inside to answer. We stand now at a precipice of understanding, forced to confront the uncomfortable possibilities that arise when all natural explanations have been exhausted. The chain of evidence, the impossible brightening, the ghost-like course correction, the mathematical signal, the synchronous anomaly of a second interstellar object, and the coordinated institutional silence compels us to consider what was once unthinkable. Let us calmly and methodically walk through the most plausible, non-natural hypotheses, not as a declaration of fact, but as a necessary step in a comprehensive investigation. Each of these possibilities is unsettling, but they are more consistent with the observed data than the official narrative of coincidence and cometary outgassing. The first and most conservative possibility is that we are witnessing the action of unknown physics. This hypothesis suggests that the event is entirely natural, but it is caused by a form of energy release or a principle of propulsion that is not yet part of our scientific understanding. Perhaps comets harbor a mechanism for storing and releasing energy that we have never imagined, a form of cold fusion in their icy cores, or an interaction with dark matter or vacuum energy. The trajectory change could be the result of a temporary manipulation of space-time, a localized gravitational effect. The radio signal could be an unintended byproduct of this process, a kind of energetic exhaust that just happens to be structured. This is a tempting explanation for a scientist, as it preserves the natural order of the cosmos while still accounting for the strangeness of the event. The problem with this hypothesis is its complexity. It requires us to invent a whole new branch of physics to explain a single event, a branch that has conveniently left no other trace of its existence anywhere else in the universe we have observed. It is a modern form of "here be dragons," a placeholder for our ignorance. While we should never close the door on new physics, this explanation struggles to account for the sheer intentionality of the evidence. The mathematical precision of the radio signal and the orbital mechanics of the inclination burn feel less like the byproduct of a novel physical law and more like the product of an engineered system. This brings us to the second, more direct possibility. We are observing a coordinated message. In this scenario, the simultaneous anomalies of Tsuchinshan-ATLAS and 3I-ATLAS are not a coincidence, but a deliberate demonstration of capability. Imagine a civilization that wishes to announce its presence, but in a way that is undeniable to anyone who is truly looking, yet deniable to those who are not ready to see. How would they do it? They might not send a simple "hello" on the radio. They might, instead, perform a celestial magic trick. They would take two separate, unrelated objects in our own solar system and manipulate them in impossible ways at the exact same time. The brightening of one comet becomes a flashbulb, drawing the eyes of the world's telescopes. Its impossible course correction is the first part of the message, a demonstration of precise, powerful propulsion technology. The structured radio signal is the second part, a clear, unambiguous sign of intelligence. In the subtle acceleration of the second interstellar object, 3I-ATLAS, is the third part, the final, stunning reveal. It is the signature that says, this was not a fluke. This was not a problem with one comet. This was a deliberate, system-wide act. We can be in two places at once. We can control matter and energy from a distance. In this scenario, the message is not contained within the 5 pulses of the radio signal. The message is the entire event. It is a piece of cosmic theater designed to be so statistically impossible that it forces a re-evaluation of our most fundamental assumptions. The third, and perhaps most direct possibility, is that Comet Tsuchinshan-ATLAS is not a comet at all. It is a probe, a long-duration, automated interstellar vehicle disguised as a natural object. This is the so-called Bracewell probe hypothesis, first proposed in the 1960s. The idea is that an advanced civilization would explore the galaxy not with crude ships, but with autonomous robotic probes that could travel for millions of years, hibernating until they enter a target solar system. Such a probe would be designed to be patient. It might have entered our Oort cloud thousands of years ago, matching its orbit to the cloud's other inhabitants, waiting silently. Upon receiving a trigger, perhaps the increasing radio traffic from Earth over the last century, it has now activated. In this context, the outgassing was not an explosion. It was an engine burn. The 100-fold brightening was the flare from a powerful propulsion system, perhaps a fusion drive, as the probe executed a crucial braking and plane change maneuver to alter its trajectory from a simple flyby path into a targeted observational orbit. The 5 pulses are its initial handshake, a simple mathematical signal to announce its activation and see if anyone is listening. The compact coma is not a flaw in the outgassing theory. It is the natural result of a clean, efficient engine that expels high-velocity plasma, not a cloud of dirty ice and dust. This hypothesis is chilling, but it is also the most economical. It explains every single piece of anomalous data with a single unifying cause. It accounts for the energy, the propulsion, the signal, and the lack of a traditional coma. It transforms a messy collection of contradictions into the clean, logical sequence of a machine coming to life. These are the uncomfortable possibilities that our scientific and governmental institutions are refusing to discuss in public. Unknown physics, a coordinated message, or an automated probe. Each one is paradigm-shattering, and each one fits the available evidence better than the official story. The silence from these institutions is therefore a profound failure of public duty. In the face of an event of this magnitude, their role is not to protect us from uncomfortable truths, but to present all the evidence and guide a global conversation about its implications. By choosing silence, they have created a vacuum of trust, a space where fear and speculation can grow unchecked. But the data remains, and it points, with increasing certainty, away from the familiar and towards the profound. The comet continues on its path, a silent traveler moving through the velvet dark of our solar system. Yet it is no longer just a comet. It is now a repository of questions, a focal point for a mystery that is unfolded in a cascade of indisputable, yet officially ignored, facts. Let us calmly summarize what we know for certain. We know that an object designated C-Tsuchinshan-ATLAS brightened by a factor of 100, releasing the energy equivalent of a gigaton-class explosion. Yet it produced none of the expected spectroscopic signatures of a massive outgassing event. We know that it simultaneously executed a precise 3.5 microradian course correction, a maneuver that would have required an invisible, hyper-efficient engine capable of ejecting 500,000 metric tons of mass. We know that, in the midst of this, it broadcast a structured, narrow-band signal on a mathematically significant frequency, a repeating pattern of 5 binary pulses that has no known natural origin. And we know that all of this occurred while a second interstellar object, 3I Atlas, also exhibited anomalous, unexplainable acceleration, creating a statistical coincidence of impossible scale. These are not theories. These are the documented, verified observations. Against this mountain of extraordinary evidence, the official explanation remains frozen in time: sudden sublimation of volatile ices. The official silence on the trajectory change, the radio signal, and the synchronous event of the second object is now absolute. The data blackouts on the Deep Space Network persist under the implausible guise of maintenance. The scientific journals remain empty of any peer-reviewed analysis of the most anomalous data. The conversation has been contained. The story has been managed. The questions that matter most are the ones not being asked in any official capacity. Why was a naturalistic explanation offered before all the evidence was in? And why is it being so rigidly adhered to now that it has been contradicted? Why were public data feeds cut at the precise moment a historic discovery may have been made? Why is the scientific principle of open inquiry being subverted in favor of a policy of institutional silence and narrative control? The silence itself has become the loudest statement. It speaks of a profound bewilderment, a deep-seated fear of the unknown, or perhaps a knowledge so paradigm-shattering that it is deemed too dangerous for public consumption. We are left in a state of profound uncertainty, watching an object that is behaving like a piece of technology, while being told by our designated authorities to believe it is a simple piece of rock and ice. The data does not fit the story. This is the fundamental, inescapable truth of the Tsuchinshan-ATLAS event. The dissonance between what we can see with our own instruments and what we are being told by our own institutions is a chasm that widens with each passing day of silence. As the comet continues its journey, it approaches a new and interesting milestone. In 14 days, its trajectory will carry it to its closest approach, not to us, but to a human-made object already in deep space, the Parker Solar Probe. This hardy probe, designed to withstand the inferno of the sun's corona, will have a front-row seat. Its instruments are designed to measure electromagnetic fields and charged particles with incredible sensitivity. Will its mission be altered to observe the comet? Will it be tasked with listening for the 1.665 gigahertz signal, or measuring the plasma wake of its invisible engine? Or will it, too, fall silent, its data classified, its gaze directed elsewhere by quiet command? We will be watching. We will continue to monitor the independent data, to listen to the voices of the scientists who dare to speak out, and to track the silence of those who do not. For now, the unblinking eye of the comet moves through our celestial neighborhood, a question mark hanging in the sky. It has given us a glimpse of something profound, a mystery that touches upon the deepest questions of our existence. The story is not over. The silence continues, but the truth, like the comet itself, is on a trajectory all its own.